based on how finicky Thunderbolt 3 is, what we really should do is we need to change the first of all, what we should do is pull the Thunderbolt 3 card out, change the orientation with the video card and the Aorus card, get them swapped, because Windows is going to have to go through and re-enumerate the devices until it settles down. Otherwise, we could have issues. So once the drivers settle down, then we should pull in the Thunderbolt 3. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and cut to the chase, change the cards around. Now, if what I'm going to do by doing all three, we get a BSOD, it's because the drivers have to have the 1, 2, 3. And that's the Thunderbolt 3 thing. So we're going to find out. Let's go. First thing we got to do is reboot the computer. Need to power down. Okay, shut down the computer. We'll shut it off. We're not through with the Cinema Dock because we're going to test again once we get the card swapped out. This is a lot of work for a firmware update. Okay, computer shut down. Fans have stopped. Turn off the power. Drain it. Press it and hold it down. Power's drained out. Good to go. Now we can disconnect. Set that aside. Now for some major surgery. Okay, first things first. Let's go overhead. Okay, we're going to take the Thunderbolt 3 card, set it aside. Then we're going to take these two cards and swap them. Once they're swapped, this slot becomes unavailable, and then we'll have this slot down here. Now, I'm not going to test all three cards in this slot. I'm only going to test the card that goes with the board. At least that's kind of where I'm at right now, because we're already at 2 hours and 28 minutes. So first thing we need to do is pull out the M.2 card so we can pull the video card out. So when we pull it out, it'll go right over here. So this is going to go in a bag. So we'll take out the Thunderbolt 3 first, set it aside. And since this happens to be the card in the machine, I'm going to go ahead and try it, see what happens. And I'm going to have to disconnect because the cables are going to, yeah, I can still route that. So I'll set it aside for now. I'll put it right over here before we power up. And because our M.2 is our RAID, our Windows that we're running, I want to make sure Windows correctly recognizes that. Put that in the bag and set that aside just for the minute. And the video card comes out. So pull that out, disconnect the video, and we'll do the musical cables around. So you've seen what we've done, what we've been through to get this up and running. And if you'll notice, I'm just barely clearing that slot. A ribbon cable, I could access it. A regular card going in there, I cannot. It's too close because this video card is 2.2 slots wide. So even with a ribbon cable in there, if you've got an RTX 3090, you don't have access to that, which you have to because that firmware for the Thunderbolt 3 card has to be in that first slot to be updated before it can be moved down. So anyway, we've got the video card now in the primary position. What we'd have had to have done would have been to have changed our RTX 3080 to something less that was only one slot wide, like the RTX 2080 Ti. It would have gone in here the first one. We could have done the firmware, had our in the second 16-lane slot. So we'll put our Aorus card in the second 16-lane slot. So we'll secure the video card first, and then since the Aorus M.2 is our boot drive, which happens to be RAID, and somebody asked the question on these cards, do they have to be installed as RAID? No, absolutely not. RAID is not a function of the card. RAID is a function of the BIOS as it relates to this card or the operating system. So if you want to install that card and just have 4 individual drives, you can do that. Okay, what we're going to do is leave the Thunderbolt 3 out of the way because Windows needs to reorientate. First of all, the BIOS needs to figure out the video card, which it should by default, but the first time it'll be a slow boot, and where this card is at, because it could affect the RAID array. So once these two cards are recognized by the BIOS, we need Windows to also do the same thing and recognize these two devices. Then once that's secured and those drivers have settled down, then we'll come back and install the Thunderbolt 3 card. So there's a method to the madness. I'm trying to simplify it for success because I really don't like a BSOD. Those are very annoying. 2 cards in, Thunderbolt 3 is set off to the side. We will plug in our video, HDMI, plug in power, turn on power, and initialize. Computer's booting. Now that we have lights coming up, video card's where it's supposed to be. The Aorus M.2 card's where it's supposed to be. That's our RAID. Once I hear it post, I'm going to go to the BIOS just to make sure we see our boot. Because if we don't see our boot, we got a problem. Okay, right now the BIOS is trying to figure out where things are at since I've changed. So I hope it will accept what we've done. So the BIOS is reconfiguring itself. Once we hear a post, then we'll go to the BIOS. Okay, I hear the post. Okay, we go to settings. Right now we go to boot and we don't see our RAID array. So we've got to go to settings, I/O ports, and we change the first slot back to auto for the video card because it was on 4x4x4x4. Remember, all these details matter. Change one thing, changes everything. And we set the M.2 card, which is in the second 16-lane slot, to 4x4x4x4. So with those settings set, we can do an F10, and the BIOS now shows us the changes we've made. We'll reboot and check the BIOS again. It's real easy to miss some of this stuff. That's why we're stepping through this, because we changed the orientation of those cards. As soon as we hear a post, we'll go back in. Once the BIOS sees the video card, correct, yeah, there we got a post. We'll go back in. Okay, back in the BIOS. Let's go to boot. Sees Windows Boot Manager, AMD RAID, which is correct. Let's go to settings, I/O ports, and the bifurcation is correct for the video card in the by 16_1, and the bifurcation for the by 16_2 where the N.2 NVMe card is at, 4x4x4x4. And if we wanted to go look at our RAID configuration utility, controller management, we can view controller information, and it sees one controller, 4 drives, 1 RAID array. I'll cancel that. We'll rescan the disks just for double measure. It shows 4 drives all online. Show array 1, RAID 0, 7.9 terabyte normal. Okay, takes us back. Now we can do an F10, save, and we'll be back. Because we changed the cards, we changed the way the card is configured in the particular slot was in. So now that's verified, we'll go into Windows and go to the next step. Once that's done, Windows may have to do a couple of reboots because we've changed the way those devices are recognized with the BIOS. Once Windows reconfigures itself, okay, we'll hear a post. This time we'll go back into Windows. Then the next boot, we'll go back and plug in the Thunderbolt 3 card in this last 8-lane slot. And it's taken us 2 hours and 40 minutes to get this far. But we've done 3 cards. And we've had success on 3 cards. The first card that comes with the motherboard, we can still have USB 2, but based on what we've seen with the 2 retail cards, I don't see that we need USB 2 signaling. It is what it is. Okay, we're getting the wheel up. We got to give Windows time to let it boot. Still got my gloves on. I got to tell you, when I started this process, I figured this was going to be about maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And here we are at 2 hours and 41 minutes. So we're either committed or we ought to be. But I got to tell you, this is a blast. I hope you guys are enjoying this. And I hope you're getting value out of this. This is something that needed a video to answer the questions. Because as we stepped through, even with the information that Wizard had, we had some snafus. So I hope this will help you to be successful. And if Windows hangs on me again, then I may have to push it. In other words, power down, power back up to get it to force it. But I'm going to try to wait. I need a drink of water. That'll give that time. I'm back. But Windows is not up yet. So we're going to push it and make Windows boot. Okay, we've still got the dial spinning, and it's been quite a while. So we're going to push it and power down, power back up. I hope we don't have to do this 3 times. I hope just twice will do it. Okay. Power down the machine, power back up. It's not an issue with the computer or the BIOS or the motherboard. It's an issue with Windows. I hear the post. We let the Windows wheel dial spin for 30 seconds to a minute. We've got a drink of water to clear my throat. Now we'll see if we get the Windows dial up again, which we do, and we'll see if this time it'll punch on through and go ahead and boot. Remember, we've changed the orientation of the cards, so we got to get a successful boot before we can get back to Windows. And if it hangs again this time, we'll do it a 3rd time. And I hope we don't have to go more than 3 times. Windows is coming up. Okay. Again, there's another step if you have a little snafu after you change those cards. Power down, power back up, force it. Okay, Windows is blinking. I expected that because it's, had to re-recognize the video card, had to re-recognize the RAID. It's amazing Windows works at all when you think about what all it does, even though it's not a real-time operating system. Okay, let's go to the control panel and see what we've got. Everything looks good. Won't do any good to call it the Thunderbolt 3 control panel, but I'm going to look at the Windows control panel, device manager, and everything looks good. I don't see any errors or any problems. I see a RAID array, which is what I should see. Everything's good. So now we're going to power down, power back up, get our card installed. So we'll power down, tap, computer shuts down. As soon as it's completely shut down, Fans are off. Turn off power. Press and hold to drain it. Done. Disconnect the power. Now we'll take our card and put it back in. Thunderbolt 3, here we come. And again, no USB 2 header. We're going down here to this long lost. You pull those cables up just a tad to get back here to this. Now remember this first card we're trying, because we're going in reverse order. This first card we're trying is the last of the cards in the retail box. So I'm going to go ahead and step through all 3 of the cards, make sure they work in this slot. This whole thing was about updating the firmware so we could put the card from the first 8-lane slot to the second 8-lane slot. And the whole issue has been about USB 2. Well, we can't have USB 2 connected on these retail cards for whatever reason. And it doesn't look like we need USB 2. So it looks like we could have put this card in without the firmware update down here all along. But we didn't know that. Hindsight. The only way to test that theory is to build another machine exactly like this in the same status with the same BIOS and go through that process. But we're not there, and even if I could to test it, because we know what we did to solve it, I'd go with what we know and keep going forward. Okay, cards installed, we're configured, everything's secured. Video card, first 16-lane slot, overlaps because it's 2.2 slots wide. The M.2 card, the Aorus card, is in the second 16-lane slot, and it's only 1 slot wide. And we now have Thunderbolt 3 in that last 8-lane slot. So if you got, whereas we have an RTX 3080, if you've got an RTX 3090, and you are 3 slots wide, you are now good to go. But you had to update the firmware in that slot over there, according to what we know. Could the firmware update been done in this second slot? I don't know. I know what I know, but there's no way to go back in time and find out. But knowing what it takes to get it to this point, I would follow this same procedure if I had it to do over again, because we know what works. So let's power up and see what we got. Plug in power, turn on power, let's energize. We got power. So system's coming up. You can see lights coming up on the video card. Fans are working. System's powering up. I love it when a plan comes together. Okay, we'll go through the same process. Now we have it up and running. We'll go into Windows, double check it, go through the 2 devices, make sure we have connectivity. Change one thing, changes everything. I will try the other cards with the USB 2 header just for verification. I know. If we don't need it, why bother? Because I want to know. I'm curious. Now the system is running. We're waiting for the boot. Won't that be something if the system doesn't boot? I mean, it's running, but we're not even getting on to post. And this is all about putting this card in the second slot, the second 8-lane slot. But we got nothing on screen. We're not getting on post, and we got an LED code that doesn't make any sense. So I'm gonna power down. We'll power back up. See what happens. I'll go ahead and drain it just to be safe. Drain it. Power supply back on. Power back on. Let's see if it'll boot. It looks like it may boot. No, it hangs. It looks like a backward 6 and a backward 4. No, it's a 4. Yeah. So that looks like B4. No, D4. So the code on the board, right over here, that looks like a D4. Right there. Be looking at it that way. So we get a D4. All this work just to get this up so we could get this in this second slot. And not happening. Wow. A lot of work for nothing. I'm going to try one more thing. I'll power down. Turn the power supply off. Drain it. Okay. Disconnect. Just for grins, I'm going to put the USB 2 header on it and see what happens. Now I expect when I put this on here, the system won't even boot. But I could be wrong. Okay. Card's in. Power's plugged back in. Turned on. Energized. No boot. So whatever's going on with that USB 2 header, that keeps that from coming up. And that card, this system won't boot with that card in there. So we're going to pull this card out, go to the second one, and see what's going on. So this card will work in the first 8-lane slot, but it's not going to boot in that second 8-lane slot. And that's what this is all about. I think it's important we step through this to find out. And the last card we do will be the one that comes with the motherboard. Well, what we do know is this card has a current firmware, and the card will function, but only in the first 8-lane slot. Now we'll try this other one. I gotta tell you, this is some crazy stuff we're doing. And again, we'll try it with just the basics. We'll leave USB 2 off. So we'll plug in the Thunderbolt 3 header, and we'll go ahead and do the power. I don't think it's necessary, but I'm doing it anyway. Keep everything apples and apples, and no USB 2. So we'll put that back in. See if it'll boot with this card. If these cards won't work with this firmware update, then there's not really much reason in doing the firmware update. But Wizard was successful getting the card firmware update done using the card that came with the motherboard. So we're stepping through this with these retail cards. We'll see. Okay, cards in. No USB 2 header. Everything else is connected. Plugged in, turned on. Let's energize. See how far we get. See if it'll boot this time. See if we get past D4. In the BIOS codes, we go from B, C, E, but there is no D, and F. So that's real helpful. Now B4 is USB device hot plug, but that didn't look like a B to me. That looked like a D. So same thing. The system starts up, but the system won't go through the post. It hangs on what looks like to me D4. I'm not much for those. I'm not much for those LED readouts. I like the codes I hear, but no beeps, no posts. It is what it is. So we're still at the same spot. It's just nothing. So in that status, all we can do is power down again, hold it, power off, turn it off, drain it, drained. Okay, that is the second card. The next card we're going to test will be the one that came with the motherboard. But you guys, this is some crazy stuff. We were successful in getting the firmware update, but this is all about getting this in this last slot. Right now, that ain't happening. In one respect, I don't know if I'm going to share with you what I've done, but in another respect, I think you need to see where this is at, so you'll know status. And if I can ever get Wizard to give me a buzz, I'll ask him some questions about this, because I've been leery of doing this until we had success, and he had success, so I figured that was enough to show it. But it's not. So there's two cards with updated firmware, but they still have to be put in the first 8-lane slot. I'm processing. So even though I'm telling you, I'm telling myself. What's up with that? So this is the card that came with the motherboard. This is the card that he was successful in getting running, but he also did not have anything in this second 16-lane slot. But for us to do that, we would have to have the M.2 on the motherboard, and we'd have to pull the Aorus card. So what I'm going to do is try this card. If this doesn't work, just to prove a point for post, is pull the Aorus M.2 card. We'll have no operating system, but we'll see if it'll post. If it'll post, then we'll have to take the other drive that's supposed to be underneath the video card and install it, which brings up another point. Interesting. Priorities. Okay. Now the first question is, will this work with the USB 2? Don't know. So the first thing we need to do is try it without it and see if it'll post. Because if it will post, then we can try it with it. If it doesn't post, then it's not going to matter. Some crazy stuff. Well, that gentleman a couple of years ago that bricked his card, and I said I wouldn't update that firmware unless you just absolutely need it. I'm still of the same opinion, because I don't see this solving a problem. The purpose and intent, the what, the how, and the why. If we have results, but if we don't get the results we were after, then this seems like an exercise in futility. My opinion. Revision 2, where art thou? I will find you. You are here somewhere. Okay, video card, Aorus M.2, Thunderbolt 3, everything connected except no USB 2 header. So let's plug in power, turn it on. This time, instead of watching the button, this time let's watch the lights come on. So I will turn it on. We get this far. Let's see if we go the next step. If we do not get any further than we have with the other two cards without USB 2 connected, then the next thing to do to replicate what Wizard has done is to remove the Aorus M.2 card. Then you have to ask yourself which is more important, the Aorus M.2 card or Thunderbolt 3. My thinking would be the Thunderbolt 3 is primary. But if that's the case, then I have to go back to putting the drive underneath the video card. So I'm just saying, options. And we're at the same point, D4 over here. Okay, fans on the video card are off, so it's good to go. Let's just give it a minute and see if we're going to post. Okay, the question being, if we configure this exactly the way that Wizard has configured this, which means we need to pull out the Aorus M.2 card, then that tells me there still needs to be a BIOS update because there's some issue with the slot and lane assignment for the allocation of PCI Express resources. In other words, if we pull out the Aorus M.2 card and it's empty so that we get Thunderbolt 3 up and running, then you have to decide which one of those two is more important. And based on my understanding, experience, and knowledge of this, I would prioritize Thunderbolt 3 primary with the Aorus M.2 secondary. But if you can't have them both in there because this is in the second slot, then there needs to be a BIOS update to work with that. The other option would be if there's something I need to do with the Aorus M.2, which means rebuild the RAID, for that to be seen as in auto instead of 4x4, which is a distinct possibility. So since we're not getting past the D4 again, this is not working. The next thing to do now is to pull out the Aorus M.2 card just to see if we can get post. Because if we get post, that means we're going to have a BIOS update. So let's try it and see what happens. So, hold down the power button. Power's off. Turn off power supply. Drain it. Okay. Disconnect power. Alrighty. The Aorus M.2 card is now coming out. Because in Wizard's configuration, that's exactly what he had set up. He had a 2080 Ti in the first slot. He had the Titan Ridge in the second slot to get it up and running. Then he had the second by 16 lane slot. Nothing was there. And then he had the slot 5, which is the PCI Express single lane slot. He had a Koenig 3G video capture card. And yes, we're going to be talking about video capture in another video. Video capture and video streaming. We're going to look at a couple of 4K cards. But anyway, back to the resource allocation. We're going to pull this Aorus M.2 card out and see if that makes a difference. If this works, Gigabyte, we need a BIOS update. We're just about there. I'll tell you one thing. We'll do a summation about what we know and what we think. And right now, my opinion is we need a BIOS update still. So let's see. We got a video card in, and we're in the second 8-lane slot. Let's see what we get. Okay. Plug power back in. Turn on power. Energize. Let's see if we get a post. You can see everything's up and running. Video's running. Fans are kicking up. Right after this, we should hear a post. We're going through the codes. We're getting past the D4. This time it's 15, 14. Still don't know yet if it's going to boot. Yep, it posted. Because it posted, now we're going to go to the BIOS. And there we are. We are in the BIOS. Okay. That speaks volumes, folks. We've done 3 cards. We followed the instructions loosely on what Wizard had said, and everything matters. We can have something in the first 16-lane slot, which is a video card. We cannot have the M.2 card in the second 16-lane slot if we're going to put the Thunderbolt 3 card in that last 8-lane slot. So as the prioritization of devices goes, if you've got an RTX 3090, it'll go in the first 16-lane slot. And if your prioritization of devices is Thunderbolt 3, you can now put Thunderbolt 3 in that second 8-lane slot. But you cannot have the Aorus M.2 card in the second 16-lane slot, or it won't boot. So that tells me we need a BIOS update, because there is no firmware update to be done on the M.2 cards, and all the M.2 cards should be the same. Now, I will follow through and try an ASUS card in there, because the question came up if they're all the same. My expectation's always been absolutely. But I will double check that. But right now, that's wild. Even though we're in the BIOS and you can see it, we don't have anything to boot because there's nothing installed. But what we do have is Thunderbolt 3. And Thunderbolt 3 remembers our settings. So everything there is still good to go. So without the BIOS update, wow. We still need a BIOS update. We can get, now one other thing to try is if we plug in the USB 2 cable. Not that we need it, but I'm curious if we plug it in if it'll work. I'm going to try it. I want to find out. We've come this far. My gosh, we've been through 3 cards. And we've just found out that the problem is not with the cards. We still need a BIOS update, because if we've got our M.2 card in here, the only way that everything works together is the Thunderbolt 3 card has to be in the first 8-lane slot to get the M.2 card in the second 16-lane slot. I got another idea I might try later. I will let y'all know if it works, if it's successful. We're going to try a riser card, as I had said, so we can get the M.2 card up so I can get the proper emissivity readings. I need to have the FLIR camera in the same parallel plane. So we might try monkeying with that and see if that will let us get the video card down there in the second 16-lane slot with the M.2 card in the first. In fact, we can verify that right now. What I'm going to do is we're going to pull the RTX 3080. It's 2.2 wide, 2.2 slots wide. We're going to put in the 2080, and we'll put the 2080 Ti in the second 16-lane slot, and we'll put the Aorus M.2 card in the first 16-lane slot and see if that will work to have the Thunderbolt 3 card in the second 8-lane slot. Okay, stay with me. I'm in the BIOS. I need to do an F10 to save, and I need to turn the machine off. Okay, power's off, drained, and unplugged. Now this time we need to pull the video card out so we can get everything into that tight space, because we need this video card to be here, but it's got to be a single lane card. So we're going to need to disconnect these and move this. So the bag, out comes the 2080 Ti. Okay, we got our power taps plugged in. Okay, we've removed the RTX 3080. We've got the 2080 Ti down here in the second 16-lane slot. So we're going to see now if we can put the M.2 card in here and if it'll function. Now the BIOS still is expecting to see the video card in slot 1, but it will go through and interrogate and it'll find it. Question is if it'll boot. So my expectation was that we needed a BIOS update for this to work. It looks like we're still going to need a BIOS update for this to work. I want to make sure those cables are away for the Thunderbolt 3 from the video card so that doesn't interfere with anything. And we'll get the video card secure. You know, it's all about solutions and priorities, and that's what we're trying to figure out. Because if you got an RTX 3090 and it has to go in that first 16-lane slot, then the second 16-lane slot has to have the Aorus M.2. However, if your priority are the two cards that come with the motherboard, what we're going to try to find out is by changing the orientation so that we have the video card in the second 16-lane slot and put the Aorus M.2 in the first 16-lane slot, will we be able to will we be able to post with the Thunderbolt 3 card in that second 8-lane slot? Because theoretically you wouldn't have access to this first 8-lane slot. That's what we're trying to figure out what'll work, and we're testing with what we've got. Aorus M.2 is installed, secure, video card. The RTX 2080 Ti is installed, secured, and the Thunderbolt 3 Titan Ridge card is installed and secured. And everything's plugged in except for the USB 2 header. So let's plug in video, HDMI. Let's plug in power. And what I'll do is we'll turn it on, and when I energize, we'll keep the camera on the overhead so we can see how we're going to power up. And if it posts, I'll let you know. Because the first thing is can we get to post? Can we get past this B4? I don't know. Power's on, energize, power's coming up. We'll watch our codes. We'll be listening for the PC speaker to hear if we post. Fans on the video card are in high gear right now. Case fans have come on, slowed down. I think it's going to post. Now, if I were going straight to Windows, I should have pulled this card out since I've changed the orientation again. And I'll have to boot into the BIOS to change the configuration on these slots again because I've changed the orientation. Okay, I heard a post. We're going into BIOS. That's progress. So, let's look at boot. We won't see anything. So we've got to go to settings, change the orientation of those slots. Bifurcation has to be changed back to 4x4 for that to work on that RAID, because that's the way it was originally built. The second 16-lane slot will be changed back to auto, and that's 4x4. Okay, so far we've got the Aorus M.2 card in the first 16-lane slot. We've gone into the BIOS and we're changing our bifurcation because we have to recognize the RAID array to boot Windows. And we've got the video card, which is a GeForce RTX 2080 Ti. Now, I don't know if this is a PCI Express 3 or PCI Express 4 thing, but the RTX 2080 Ti is PCI Express 3. That RTX 3080 is PCI Express 4. That could be the other issue that's going on. Another way to find out is to test for that. And let's take a look at the BIOS. I've left the default for the video to be PCI Express 1. It'll go through and check and it'll find it, change it. But the bifurcation is all we've changed. We have the above 4G limit set at the default of 40 bits. But if this is a PCI Express 3 versus PCI Express 4 issue, then we need a BIOS update. So even though I should have pulled the card out because of what's going to happen with the drivers, let's see if we can do this without a BSOD. First thing to do, what we've done in the BIOS, once that setting is saved, I'm going to power down. I'll pull the Thunderbolt card so that we can get Windows again to reorient according to the drives that are, and devices that are here. When that's full and complete, then we'll come back and put the Thunderbolt 3 card in and we'll test it. Otherwise, we could get a BSOD, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. But this is the first step. So we've changed bifurcation 4x4x4x4 for the Aorus M.2, and the second 16-lane slot to auto, because that's where the video card is, which now is PCI Express 3.0. So when I do F10 and save, it'll save those two changes. So we're going to save the BIOS. When it reboots, power down the machine, pull the Thunderbolt 3 card out. There's a process the fans go through as they cycle before I hear the post. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it off, hold the power button, shut down, turn it off, drain it. Okay, pull the power. We're going to pull the Thunderbolt 3 card because we need Windows to come back up. And I use the term enumerate because that's the term that Microsoft and everybody else used. Somebody else didn't like my using that term. I said, well, take it up with Microsoft and Intel. Okay, Thunderbolt 3 card. Thunderbolt 3 card is up and out of the way. Just these two cards. We're going to boot the computer. Go back into Windows. Plug in power. Turn it on. Energize. Okay, we see the lights coming on. As the system comes back up, I'm going to go back into the BIOS just to double check to make sure we see our RAID array so we can get into Windows. We're now at 3 hours and 31 minutes. Okay, I heard it post. We're going back into the BIOS. Let's check our boot. And there's our Windows Boot Manager, so we're good to go. So we'll do F10, save it, go back into Windows. Because we got to make sure that we got our drivers since we're doing this. This is most interesting, most confusing, and probably the most enlightening video of any we've done. Okay, I hear a post. We'll get back up into Windows. We've got our little circle. And yes, I will try the USB 2 cable one more time. When we do this next time, put the card in, I'll put the cable on, see what happens. And if it doesn't, then we'll pull it off so we can get back into Windows and do the drivers. Okay. I'll show you as soon as it gets through. Because we have a different video card in, it's got to re-recognize. Okay. Driver's model is the same, it's just got to put the right one in for the right card. Might have to do a reboot. See if we can go to Control Panel, Device Manager. Everything looks good. Display adapter is the RTX 2080 Ti. And the disk drive is the RAID array. Okay, that's all good. It was a lot easier than I thought it'd be. We need to power down so we can put the card in, then reboot. Okay, power is off. Power. Energize. Drain it. Remove power. Now Thunderbolt 3 will go back in and we'll try it with the USB 2 header. We'll see if it hangs. I don't understand the point of the USB. That was supposed to be for hot swap. And from what I can tell, we've got device enumeration, so we'll see if it'll boot. You got to wonder if we're going to get a BIOS update to get this fixed before the WRX80 comes out. Don't know. I hope so. Because of 7 slots, 7 16-lane slots, that could be a big issue. Okay. Same issue again. Let's get those cables clear so they don't interfere with the fans. Good clearance. Aorus M.2 is good. Video card is good. RTX 2080 Ti. And Thunderbolt 3. And we have the USB 2 cable plugged in. So, we'll plug in power. We'll turn it on. We'll energize. And let's see how far we get. Now, this is the card that comes with the motherboard. We have the USB 2 header plugged on. The system came on. The system would not come on with this plugged in with the other two retail cards. We were able to get into Windows without the cable plugged in, but this time we've got the cable plugged in. No, excuse me, we weren't able to get anywhere. So even though we had retail cards plugged in down here, I heard a post, everything's plugged in, it's going to work. So there's something different with this card that comes with the motherboard versus the other two that are retail. We're getting a post. Windows is coming up. Windows has already done its changes. We should now be able to see that Thunderbolt 3 card. I was expecting the same thing with the Thunderbolt 3 card. Windows is going to see it in a different slot. Device enumeration has to occur. And I'll go to that screen just as soon as Windows comes up, because I would expect you'll see something in the bottom right hand corner that indicates what's going on with Thunderbolt 3. And I don't see anything different. Nothing happened. I expected it would. So let's, just for grins, I'm going to go to Control Panel, Device Manager. Everything looks good. I don't see any errors. I don't need to go look at it. This is what we need, is the Thunderbolt 3 control panel. Port 1 and 2, About, shows the driver, and the NVMe non-volatile memory firmware version 50. So I'll go through the same dog and pony show. We're going to plug in our USB-C device, and we should see a screen pop up with a dialog box with the contents. We do. I can unplug it. It goes away. So we have verified the card works. We have USB-C connectivity. That's using the SanDisk. Now we'll verify with the BlackJet Cinema Dock. Plug in the cable. Let's go back over to Windows. Since we don't have a device in it, we'll call up the control panel. We'll plug in to the card, and it shows BlackJet Cinema Dock. So we have 100% success. It's taken us 3 hours and 39 minutes to get this far. I hope you guys don't see more than an hour of this, but I want you to see as much of it as possible. And I will, as someone said, Gil, don't you ever take a break? Excuse me, Gil, don't you ever take a breath? Well, I do, but I cut all that out so you don't have to see it. So let's take a look overhead and do a summation of where we're at. So I'll unplug the cable. Device goes away. That is wicked. Wow. And now let's go overhead. So what we're looking at overhead is we have a computer that's fully booted, and the purpose of this, as we started, because that's where the question was at, can I get Thunderbolt 3 in the second 8-lane slot? Yes, with the firmware update on the card that comes with it. And we have USB 2 connected. On the two cards that are retail that we tried, we got the firmware updated, but the firmware update has to be done in the first slot as far as we can tell. But the other two cards in the second slot would not work with USB 2 connected, but they'll work in the first slot. So anyway, with what comes with the motherboard, you got the Gigabyte TRX40 Designare motherboard, and you got two I/O cards, an Aorus M.2, which is PCI Express 4, and the Gigabyte Titan Ridge Thunderbolt 3 card, which is PCI Express 3. Once the firmware update is applied, that card will work in the second 8-lane slot. Now, here's the kicker. If we put the Aorus M.2 card in the second 16-lane slot, the system won't boot. The Aorus M.2 card in this configuration has to be in the first 16-lane slot, and we have an RTX 2080 Ti, which is PCI Express 3, in that second 16-lane slot. If we change it, the system will not boot. It hangs on D4 on this code. So what that tells me is, if you got PCI Express 4.0 video card and you're say an RTX 3080 Ti that takes up 3 slots, and you're trying to get this to work, that will work as long as you don't try to use the Aorus M.2 card, because it has to go in the first 16-lane slot if the Thunderbolt 3 card is in the second 8-lane slot. Now, if anybody wants to dispute it, you've seen it, we've done it, you've heard it, I've said it. And right now I've got the 2080 Ti in here, but if I want to put the system's all about content creation. If I want to put the RTX 3080 back in here, it has to be in this second 16-lane slot. Now, I don't know if this is an issue with slot and lane assignment for PCI resources, PCI Express 3.0 versus PCI Express 4.0, or if it has something to do with the BIOS. But anyway, this is all BIOS related. To get this to work, you're going to have a BIOS update that we don't have right now. In fact, let's take a look at the system. TRX40 Designare. We'll look at support. We're going to check the BIOS. Right now, this is 2/25/2021. We are looking at BIOS F4i, and that's the BIOS we have. F4i, that's what's installed. And that's dated 9/25/2020. So to get this to work in any other configuration is going to require a BIOS update. Now, if it's not a PCI Express 3 version 4 issue and it's something to do with resource allocation according to slot, then we should be able theoretically to take a riser card with a riser cable and get that video card up and out, which presents other issues. So in the next video, we're going to do an unboxing of that riser cable and riser card and see if we can verify. Pretty simple on PCI Express 3, a little more complicated because of the signal integrity on PCI Express 4. We have a 4.0 cable that we're going to try and see if we can make this configuration work with this slot and lane assignment with that device. The original purpose and intent of that was to get the Aorus card up so we could get a picture of it. But now I want to see if we can get the video card in here that's 2.2 slots wide up so we can have the processing power of the CUDA cores on that card. Because if it'll work for the RTX 3080, it'll work for the RTX 3090, which means different case. But I'm curious. I want to find out. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I got to tell you, this has been one bear of a project. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank you for watching. You guys are amazing. We're on to the next video. We're out.